Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode at amazic.com, where we talk to leaders and influencers from around the cloud native space. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Amazic. And we have with us today Keith Mokris, who is the VP of Product Marketing at Orca Security. Keith, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much, Twain. I'm really excited to be here.
So just to recap, we spoke to Andrew Bartlam recently, who's also from the Orca team. And he spoke to us about 9 focus areas of Orca. And we found out that recently Orca has added a 10th focus area. And so that's actually the focus of this podcast. And so that's what we want to talk to Keith about. And the 10th focus area happens to be Shiftleft Security. So, before we get into Shiftleft, I was wondering, Keith, if you could just, for those who are tuning in without watching, who haven't watched the first episode, if you could sort of give us the elevator pitch of Orca and especially touch upon the idea of Sidescanning, which is the secret sauce of Orca solution. If you could take it from there and move to Shiftleft, that would be great.
Definitely. So Twain, thank you so much. And I'm really excited to kind of start with a recap here. But ultimately, Orca is an agentless cloud security platform that focuses on addressing all of the different risks that you have in the cloud across your public cloud infrastructure and applications, whether it's AWS, Google Cloud, or Microsoft Azure. And so whether you're looking for vulnerabilities, trying to achieve compliance, or looking at many other risk scenarios, we want to be that all-encompassing solution that doesn't rely on agents in order to secure your cloud environments. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about Orca is we, really exist and continue to grow because of the rise in cloud adoption and all of the different cloud native services and application architectures that teams are gravitating toward today. And I mention that because that's really going to plug into our main topic today around Shiftleft Security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great as an intro. And, coming to Shiftleft Security, so it's not a totally brand new idea, I'd say, because, since the start of DevOps, the idea has kind of been floating around, but it was used differently, I think. It was more to do with QA testing and how they should be more part of the developer workflow, sometimes a bit about ops. But, something has changed recently. It's got a different perspective to it when we say Shiftleft, especially when we talk about security. Could you shed some light on, just the term and, what it means today and how it's different from what it used to mean?
Yeah, and I think, ultimately the evolution of Shiftleft Security is important because it really mimics the fact that these cloud environments, the way we build and deploy, and all of our different toolkits continue to change. And so that's why I think there's been this rise around Shiftleft Security as a term. And ultimately, Shiftleft Security is about finding and fixing flaws earlier in the development lifecycle so you can fix risk with less costs and ultimately release more secure applications in production. And so I think, organizations and security teams are definitely familiar with the idea of, I need to scan my cloud environment. I need to understand where my misconfigurations are. I need to understand where my vulnerabilities are. But then there kind of becomes this next step of, now what do I do? How do I feed that information back to the development and DevOps teams that are responsible for building, deploying, and configuring these applications in a very process-driven way? And I think now the toolkits have really become standardized around how organizations are building and deploying their workflows, really their CI/CD tooling, the way they're managing all of this with Git, of course. And so Orca, I think, really has an opportunity to branch out of its core competency around runtime and production security to start integrating into these workflows. And I know we've got a lot of exciting topics that we're going to cover today, whether it's containers and infrastructure as code, and all of those pieces really come together to form the basis of Shiftleft Security.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, and as security shifts left, it also means there's a change for the development team. And the development experience, the developer experience is something that, a lot of ops teams care about and a lot of organizations care about. What does Shiftleft Security mean for the developer experience? What changes? Is it good for developers and how?
Yeah, and so I think if you're doing shift left security right and you're plugging security checks into your workflows, I
Mhm.
hope we do it right to where developers are impacted as little as possible. But
Okay.
ultimately, it is going to really be a growth curve for a lot of organizations. But
Mhm.
I think it's so important to navigate all of that because developers play such a role in the security of your cloud native applications. They're the ones that are
Mhm.
configuring cloud services, if they're using a tool like infrastructure as code templates, or
Mhm.
if they're building and deploying the applications themselves, whether it's a container image, whether it's a serverless function. You want to make sure that those are configured properly. And if you have a vulnerable package, library, or operating system, you have a chance to fix that as part of your pipeline rather than fixing it after you've deployed it and it's potentially been out there for a very long time. And so I think the number one thing is if shift left security is done right, it has very little impact on the developer experience
Mhm.
because it's giving them results in a way that's easy to understand. The process is built around giving them a time frame to fix these issues and redeploy them. And that's where we really have to see security teams coming together with development and DevOps teams to build that process at their organization. It's not going to happen overnight, but the goal should really be a seamless experience for everyone at the organization.
Interesting. That's really, I think, yeah, that really matters a lot, because I mean, you don't want to slow down the developer workflow in the process of improving security. That's obviously counterintuitive. You touched on a bit about vulnerabilities in the pipeline and the operating system. Could you talk a bit more about the kind of risks that shift left really helps to identify and mitigate? Could you give us some more examples of the kind of vulnerabilities and issues?
Yeah, so I think there's two real ways to think about it. One is known vulnerabilities. So you
Okay.
might have something, whether it's a major vulnerability like Log4j or a high risk vulnerability in a library, package, or operating system that's really important to your application.
Mhm.
And the entire idea is if I'm scanning my software components before I go to deploy them, I have a chance to look at that information, understand the details of the vulnerability, and potentially have a choice to update those software components to improve the risk posture of the application. And we
Mhm.
see a lot of organizations really excelling when they prioritize a specific set of vulnerabilities or a specific set of software components that they're very familiar with. So, for
Mhm.
example, if you're an organization using Java, for example, really understanding your Java components and saying, these are high risk or critical risks, and we're going to address those. And that's going to be a project that we take on this year or this quarter, for example. The other risk that's really important that I don't think people recognize is just non-compliance risks. And here
Mhm.
we're not really talking about open source compliance, but we're talking about how I'm actually configuring my software components to run in the cloud. So, for example, if I'm using an infrastructure as code template that spins up a storage bucket, I want to make sure that that storage bucket doesn't have admin privileges, isn't
Mhm.
internet facing, doesn't have potentially read write access that would expose my corporate data to the outside world. Or with
Mhm.
my container images, for example, I want to make sure they don't have open ports, they don't run as root. And this is where you have all of the different Center for Internet Security benchmarks or custom policies that organizations may want to implement to make sure that the application is essentially hardened in the right way and won't expose information. So it's really the vulnerability layer and the compliance or configuration layer that come together to make up the security of a cloud native app.
Mhm. Yeah, if you could expand a bit on this idea of policies, because it seems like that is something again that is very related to infrastructure as code, and you don't want to be doing every check manually. Could you explain a bit about just how policies work, and how do they help with just scaling checks? Uh, why are policies important?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things to do in kind of illustrating this concept of automation that you just described, where manual checks are incredibly difficult, is
Mhm.
if you go to GitHub and pull up a random infrastructure as code template or a container image, whether it's Docker Hub or some other repo, ask a bunch of security engineers, is this secure, just by looking at it? And whether it's 10 lines of code or 100 lines of code, it's very difficult to understand all of the configurations just by looking at one of these code snippets. It's just not going to work. And because these components become essentially the templates for how your cloud platform is engineered and deployed, how your applications are going to be configured, you need to be using an automated scanning tool to ultimately do the scanning for you. And so here, when it comes to infrastructure as code specifically, so here we're talking about technologies like AWS CloudFormation templates, potentially Kubernetes YAMLs or HashiCorp Terraform templates, which are very popular. Developers essentially use these templates throughout the organization to essentially configure and provision their cloud services. And so if I have essentially an infrastructure as code template that I haven't scanned, it could have a lot of misconfigurations that are going to be multiplied when hundreds of developers go to use them in their deployments. And so you want to make sure that you're scanning those so you're, again, not exposing critical data or resources to the outside world.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to also ask about, the scanning process. Does scanning change when it's an agent-based solution versus an agentless solution? I know that Orca is agentless. I was just wondering, could you shed some light on just the differences between these two approaches to scanning?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to, agentless and agent-based approaches, there we're really talking about the runtime side of the equation.
Okay.
So essentially with Orca, we built our agentless approach around scanning your block storage that you're using on the public cloud service provider, while other solutions, you essentially have to deploy or configure a sidecar, a scanner, or some other sort of kernel module within your applications. And the challenge there is that's now a new piece of software that you need to deploy, update, and configure, where Orca wants to provide you that telemetry, and that approach is called Sidescanning, without having to deploy those agents. When it comes to scanning as part of the deployment workflows, there's lots of different ways that solutions are plugging into those developer toolkits. So it could be some sort of IDE plugin. It could be a script as part of the CI workflow or a specific plugin for the CI tool. But ultimately, you want to be able to automate that to make it really easy for the developers and DevOps teams to get those results as part of their native tooling. And so when we released our Shiftleft security capabilities, we unveiled the Orca command line interface to plug into those solutions, just like a lot of other solutions would.
Yeah, and plugging into solutions. So I think integrations with the CI/CD tools, tools earlier in the pipeline are really key. And how does Orca approach this? What are how easy is it to integrate Orca with the various, because there's so many tools these days. The supply chain is just so getting complex all with every day. Could you shed a little bit of light on Orca's approach to just integrations?
Yeah, and you definitely hit on this, and this is something you and I have both been in the cloud native and cloud space for many years, can recognize, is just that the toolkits are constantly changing at the organization, whether it's because of the new tools the CSPs are releasing, or all the new startups that want to fix problems in this new world and make life easier for the teams at their organization. And ultimately, we have a command line. Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, we have a command line interface that can be scripted to run on the developer desktop or as part of the build process, just as part of that scripting. And so that allows us to integrate that scanning process as part of any of the modern CI/CD tools that you're using. We also are able to scan your different container registries as well. So that gives you coverage across that CI/CD workflow. But there are certainly a lot of other organizations building a lot of pre-built plugins and trying to find new ways to get developers feedback. And as we continue to roll out and improve these capabilities, we'll be looking to see how Orca can improve that for all of our customers as well.
Awesome. And we're winding down with the last few questions, but I just want to get a little bit about a few details on just how Orca handles the reporting part of the security scan. So does Orca just tell you, hey, there's a vulnerability, we've spotted this vulnerability in this place, you need to fix it? Or can you set up Orca's policies to be so that, that resource gets quarantined? How does Orca handle, when a vulnerability is spotted?
Yeah, so I think it's important, in order to talk about how we identify vulnerabilities, it's important to understand all the different contextual data sources that we're bringing together. And so we call this the unified data model within the Orca platform. And so here we're looking at the cloud service provider control plane. So what's all the different data that we can pull in from the CSP APIs? And then we augment all of that with the technology we talked about earlier, which is called Sidescanning. So there we're able to see the workloads and applications themselves and understand if they have any known CVEs. But importantly, there's a lot of other data we're pulling in as well as part of this unified data model. So we're pulling in network flow logs and audit logs. We're going to be looking at your API configurations of the web applications you're running themselves. We're pulling in a lot of IAM configuration data as well. And all of this comes together so we understand not only that there's a vulnerability, but there's a lot of context we can bring together to give you really awesome prioritization. And the other thing that's very cool that really separates Orca apart from a lot of other players in the space is we have this very cool dashboard that we call attack path analysis. And so what we're looking at here is a toxic combination of risks where I might have a misconfigured cloud service that connects to a workload that has an embedded secret that then connects to data storage that's exposed to the internet. And what we're going to do is give you an overall risk score of that attack path and actually show you step by step how you would remediate those risks. So instead of organizations coming in and just getting a long list of vulnerabilities, a long list of misconfigurations, we're able to show you this connected data chain so you can really understand your risks in a whole new way. And so that's where we really feel like we're moving beyond just vulnerability management to this notion of risk context and risk scoring that allows you to spend your time in the most valuable way possible to improve the risk posture of your public cloud environment and applications.
Okay, yeah, I saw the dashboard. I think it's quite impressive. I like that, Orca's got a dedicated section just for this, in its product. And it's not like, we've got the same product. We just, you can do Shiftleft using the same product. But, I think it's just really well designed. And like you said, I didn't see that the step-by-step workflow. I'm really curious to see that. I would encourage our viewers as well to go and check out this particular feature. It sounds really cool. But yeah, I really like this approach of just how Shiftleft, it's not just a name, not just a term, but I think it's really crystallized and really made, given a place in the product itself. I really like that about Orca's approach to Shiftleft security.
Yeah, and I think it's, one of the things that really sets us apart that I think is really important is there have been a lot of vendors out in the space who have acquired amazing technologies and integrated them together in kind of a suite to give you all the pieces of the application lifecycle and runtime. And Orca really wants to step back and say, if we were going to build all of these pieces with intent from the ground up, what would they look like for not only a modern security team, but also a DevOps team and development leadership? And that's where we really have this vision for all of the Shiftleft scans and all of that context feeding what we can also surface at runtime. So I feel like we're just getting started in the space.
Yeah, and just getting started, it's still, your version 1 of Shiftleft, the feature itself. What's the roadmap like? Could you give us a glimpse of what's coming for Shiftleft within to Orca?
Yeah, definitely. So version 1 was really about releasing our command line interface and releasing our Shiftleft dashboard to support container images and infrastructure as code templates. And over time, we want to be able to support more cloud native architectures.
Okay.
So things like serverless functions, of course, as those are super popular and widely used by many modern organizations. Then we also want to support things like machine images, as organizations still have a lot of VMs in the cloud. They
Yeah.
have a lot of different ways to build and deploy their kind of golden machine image pipelines. And so we want to be able to support those architectures as well. And then I think the other big component is linking up all of the scan context from shift left into runtime. So eventually being able to look at your application at runtime and click on any application to see kind of the origin story about which developer configured that application, where are they located in the world, what was the scan context when it was built versus what it looks like when it's deployed, to really provide that delta between build and runtime. And so I think that's where we're going to be investing over the long run.
Yeah, sounds really cool. Lots more support and even more powerful features coming. I'm going to be keeping track of how this progresses, and I'd encourage all of our viewers as well to go and check out Orca and its Shiftleft Security solution. So with that, we come to the end of the questions for Keith for this part. So the next part is just to get to know Keith a bit. We've got a couple of questions, some fun questions. So Keith, yeah, just a simple one. What helps you be productive? Do you have any productivity hack you could share with us?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I think of. I mean, number one, I'm still the type of person that comes into work every single day and jots down my top 5 or top 10 list in my notebook here as a great way to kind of step outside of Slack and all of our modern project management tools that we have to deal with every day. And so if I feel like I can cross off my top 5 or my top 10, I'm making progress in the ways that are super important for the company. But at Orca, we are huge fans of Asana. And so being able to look at all of our tasks across our different teams, whether it's marketing or product, and what our launches are, what our big rocks are, that's how I'm kind of setting up my tasks for the team. I think the other thing that I definitely think is important is setting up time every day to get outside for a walk and step away from all the tech, because I've definitely found in this kind of remote work from home lifestyle we have, it's very easy to just keep plugging away and digging into your next project, but you have to give your eyes a break every so often. And so that's a good reset for me a couple times a day.
Yeah, I really like that last one, especially. I'm trying to do that myself. And so what's the best way you learn? So you can learn new ideas so many ways these days. There's books, there's audio, video, so many things. So what are some of your favorite ways to learn new stuff?
Yeah, so I would say if you would have asked me a couple years ago, I would have definitely said like going to conferences and spending lots of time watching virtual sessions. And I certainly still do that when I have time. But I've certainly found over the last couple years, that's become increasingly difficult. So I think for me, being a visual learner, I definitely love like video demos or getting hands-on with a product itself. And so that's where really the rise of YouTube, the rise of sessions like this, right, where you can be on video with someone on the other side of the world talking about a really cool topic. I really try and absorb those types of sessions and those types of demos where I can kind of breeze through the content at my own pace, focus on kind of the learning areas that I'm really excited about, and then dig into those, more and more in future.
Yeah, that's true. That's really cool. And following up on that, I want to ask your favorite YouTube channel, if you could give us one tech and one non-tech.
Yeah, so I think I'll give you a couple. I mean, I'm a huge chess player, and so there's a lot of different chess channels that I watch. And over the last couple of years, it's really been the rise of modern kind of chess in a way, because everyone was at home during the pandemic and everyone was playing online. So I certainly love the Gotham Chess channel. He has a huge following. And I also love, there's a channel called Agad Mator who plays current games and famous games and gives a lot of insight into those. So those are two channels that I'm watching every couple of days, if not every day. And then when it comes to tech channels, I honestly am just looking to see what people are sharing on Twitter, where I have a lot of different people that I follow between security researchers, different companies throughout the CNCF, different open source contributors. And so I kind of rely on following all of them to see kind of what surfaces to the top, what are they sharing and commenting about a lot, And when I see that happening, I kind of pause and dig into it every week.
Really cool. Wow. Chess, interesting game. Yeah. It takes a long time though to finish a game, but yeah, it's really cool that you play chess.
Yeah, thanks.
So yeah, the last thing you Googled, I don't know if you can remember this off the top of your head, but.
Oh man, the last thing I Googled. Interesting. It was probably something around a recent vulnerability that like our security team is researching and trying to understand what they were working on. And so we had a conversation around some security research this morning. So that's probably the last thing I officially typed into Google.
That's your morning cup of coffee. Nice search
catching
about
up on
vulnerability. So if not for your career in tech, what would you be?
Oh man, I have no idea. Let's see. I mean, it would probably be something, this is something I reflect on a lot, but something around education. And so outside of tech, I had an original career in fundraising for a couple different nonprofits. And so potentially, evaluating that and seeing how I can take what I've learned in tech and potentially bring that into the educational sphere. Because that's something that gets me really excited, because when I look at my career and what I'm doing every day in tech, I don't feel like it's really a lot of things that I learned in school. There's certainly a lot of soft skills I learned, whether it's public speaking, creative writing, and things like that, that feed into being a product marketer. But I'd love to find more ways to take, the case studies that you're thinking about day in and day out in your job and your career, and potentially bringing those into education. That's at least something that's top of mind for me.
Yeah, wow, that's really a noble goal. I think bridging the gap between education and the workplace. That's really awesome. So with that, we come to the end of all our questions for you, Keith. To wind up, if you could tell everyone where they could find you online, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, definitely. So you can certainly connect on LinkedIn, just via my profile, which is Keith Mokris, and then definitely connect on Twitter, where it's just, again, twitter.com/Keith Mokris, all one word. Those are kind of the two main ways that I love to connect and stay in touch with people in the tech community and the cloud security community.
Yeah, it's nice to have a unique second name so you can always get those the usernames.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that, we come to the end of this podcast. Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing your ideas. Thank you for the time. It was lovely just spending this half hour or so with you. And our viewers, do keep track of what Orca is doing, especially with the Shiftleft Security. And we'll be covering this and more on amazic.com. So if you want to know more about Orca, more about Shiftleft, any of these infrastructure as code, any of these ideas, head over to amazic.com. We've got articles covering these topics. We've got video interviews like this, and we do event coverage as well. So stay tuned, go and follow us there at amazic.com. So with that, we come to the end of another podcast. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks, Keith, as well. Thank you, guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.